Hello everyone, welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. My name is Mati. Today we're going to be creating Elven Cities with the Watercolor City style. So I'm trying to do a city every single month. So we're going to do Elven themed and I'm looking forward to it. I'm just going to go ahead and put a link in the chat for you if you want to follow along in today's stream. Go ahead and clone and edit that map right there. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. I'm just going to get right started. All right, so zoom out. So with making a city and just with making any map is you have to have some kind of process first, because it's hard, because a city is a large endeavor. There's a lot that you have to do. So if you do some planning first, it won't be quite as difficult, because what happens more than not is that you're working on a large project and you lose motivation or steam. So having a process can help you to stay focused, because you don't want to lose steam on a project, especially if you have a timeline, if you're working on a commission, or if you're a DM and you have to have a campaign or a session coming up soon, okay? So let's go ahead and get started with process first, okay? And with making a city, and with any map is setting the scale first. Because this isn't a battle map, we don't have to worry about how many square feet is a grid piece. Instead, we're going to set scale by population, okay? Hey, first time chatter, so glad that you are here. I'm really glad that you like the videos. So many great faces. Awesome. So glad that you are here. So we're going to set scale and we're going to use that for population. Like I said, when it comes to a city map, you're not moving 5 by 5 in the grid. You're not moving around. So you can use a different type of scale, and that's going to be population. So because this is a Elven city, and I generally associate a more communal kind of race of people where they kind of live together. It's very communal. So I'm going to say there's about 10 elves per household or per structure. Okay, we're just going to set that. So if you wanted 1,000 people, if you wanted a small village, if you wanted let's say like a town that you wanted 1,000 people or elves in, then you would do 100 houses. Okay, so setting a scale first is really useful for setting the size. You don't need to use a grid. So let's go ahead and remove that. Next in that process, now that we've set our scale, is to create the layout. And I totally recommend you use the path tool. You don't need a pen to do the sketch work with your layout, because it's just a sketch. You're going to end up deleting it. So if you feel discouraged about using the path tool because you don't have a pen, don't. Because it's just a sketch. You're not actually doing some final draft drawing with it. You're just doing a basic sketch. So let's go ahead and do the layout. And I like to start with making the landscape first, okay? So these red lines right here represent the landscape. If you're confused on what exactly all that is, let's go here. This right here is going to be a river gorge. And the river is going to be flowing this way. And I'm going to have a large island a large river island. It's kind of central. That's where our main centerpiece is going to be. There are these smaller islands that aren't connected by bridges. We're going to use a different form of access besides roads. And then, of course, these right here will be the ledges of the river gorge. And I'll make sure to put some city both on the river island plus in the north and the south sections as well. So it'll have 3 kind of components: the north, the middle, and the south sections of the city. Okay, so now that I have the landscape down, I can go ahead and turn on, when you first start a map, the default layer is going to be the BG layer. That's the background, okay? So you don't have any land yet. So what I recommend is you just paint your BG whatever color you want it to be. Generally, your BG is going to represent water. That's not in every case, but in this particular instance, your BG is going to be your water, okay? So paint the watercolor, whatever you want. I just recommend just taking your favorite water texture and just painting it, and then don't worry about extra texturing yet. That'll happen later as you interact by adding some land and buildings and stuff like that. So you'll take those sections that are in red and you'll fill them with the add mode of the mask tool. Now you'll have to fill it in with a brush. Okay, so You fill in those with the landscape that you want with the add mode, and that way they'll be painted separately. So your FG is your land, BG is your water. Okay. And now I also want to, now that I've kind of put down the land, I want to decide my city layout. So let's go ahead and click my city layout here. And what I'm kind of going for here is the north and a south section, and they kind of have a radial type of block structure with walls. And I'm going to have a radial-like structure at the bottom for the south section. And then, of course, in that middle section is going to be maybe a large tree, and that's where my centerpiece is going to be. Likely I'll put like a massive tree and maybe like a Griffon's Riding Den, because I can't tell you how important access is, since the only way to access much of these islands is by boat or flight. So I'll put like a Griffon's Den, maybe probably on that main island, and then we can create some landings for the Griffons to land on for a quick mobilization to defend the city, or if that's just your kind of favorite types of transport. So now that I've put that down, I can go ahead and hide both of the city, because we're going to go straight to making the landscape. So let's go into landscape here. And the first one is putting the cliffs, because remember, this is a river gorge. So to do the landscape, I've created some cliffs. Now, you're going to notice that these cliffs are kind of different. I've used a series of cliffs to create a kind of gradient effect that makes it look like the gorge cliff ledges have a little bit of a slope to it, and creating this illusion of some of the cliff has like green, there's some brown part of the cliff, and some cliffs that are underwater. And I'll show you how I made that. So that first cliff is going to be, let's see here, where am I at? 1 second. It's just a regular green cliff that I used. And then I copied and pasted that same cliff and just changed the color to brown, or if there's already a brown one, add that, put that a layer below it. Then I took that same one, copied and pasted it again, number 3, and I changed the blend mode to luminosity, and I changed some of the HSBC settings. You'll have to change some of the contrast and some of the brightness, because luminosity is only going to pick up the color, not necessarily the light and darkness or the value. So you'll have to change the value using the light and dark setting. Okay. And then I added a 4th one as well. I just copied and pasted again, and this time I just dropped the opacity so it looks like it's further underwater. So that is how I made this kind of tier-like cliffs. Okay. And I'll be using that same kind of tier-like cliffs with my river islands as well. So it's not hard to figure out. Don't forget, you can clone and edit this map. If my explanation wasn't good enough, clone, edit the map, reverse engineer, open it up. Everything is grouped and labeled, so it's very easy to navigate on these maps that I make for you guys, okay? So now that I've finished those canyon cliffs, I'll do the same thing, and you start with the largest size first. So because those large canyon cliffs are so big, they take up a lot of space, start with big and then move your way down. So the next largest cliff set is likely going to be the river island, and I use the same technique. The green cliff, then I made a brown cliff, a layer below, then the same cliff, change the opacity and the value, was using the brightness setting, and then I copied and pasted again, and I resized it so it's tiered out, and then dropped the opacity with the same luminosity blend mode. And I'm going to do those same things with all of that. So I'll do the same thing with these river islands. And then next is I want to create the illusion that the water is moving. So waterfalls, waves, show motion, because right now it just kind of looks like a pool in a gorge. So creating waterfalls is a great way to kind of create this illusion that, hey, the water is in motion. And it's always nice to have your city, town, or village near a water source. Even if it's in a desert, it needs a well. And it creates a more compelling landscape when you have an interaction between land and water. So always factor that when making your city. Okay? All right, so after waterfalls, because there's going to be a giant tree in that center island, let's put some roots in the same style that I did the cliffs, right? I took some roots that were brown, put them against the brown cliffs. Then I took some more roots, dropped them down a layer, changed the luminosity blend mode, changed the brightness value, and then it made it look like there's roots underwater, just like the cliffs look like they're underwater. So it's that same concept. And we have videos on how to do underwater stuff, okay? So definitely check out the catalog. We have so many videos. So take a look at those to see how to do that. Lastly, this is really up to you. You could put crops, trees, whatever it is you want to be surrounding the city. And so it's all part of the landscape. But I'm just going to put some trees here, but you could put farms, totally up to you. I'll put trees for now because it's elves and I like this wooded feel to it. So obviously the theme of these elves is like a woodland like elves. Once you finish that landscape, then you want to put up your walls. Let's put up our layout real quick of the city. We'll go ahead and put on that city so that it's there, and you can just drop the opacity. What's really great about the path tool is that your sketch can be grouped, all those paths can be grouped, and then you can label it your layout, and then you can drop the opacity so you can put stamps or textures on top of it without it getting in the way. So I'll set it to a lower opacity so that I can at least see it and work with it. Now I have that layout, and I know where my city limits are because it's right there in my sketch. So next, you'll want to put in your walls, the walls that are going to defend the north side and the south side. And the Elven set has some great tall walls here. And you can see I've got the walls here. And I scaled them up just a little bit to make them a little bit larger. While everything else is going to be around 50%, these walls are closer to 100%. It was just that contradiction in scale of stamp size is just there to show the enormity and the massiveness of the walls. So if it's okay if your scale isn't 100% for every stamp, as long as it's not so crazy that the line work of the stamp, the line work in the art is so exaggerated that it looks off. So just be weary or be careful when you do it, okay? All right, so I've added a wall on the north side, south side. Putting walls together without the wall tool is just Tetris. You're just putting the walls pieces together one by one. If you have that outline or that layout sketch, putting walls together will be a lot easier because you have a sketch to work with, okay? We don't have the room tool yet. Once we do have the room tool, making walls will just be as simple as click, hold, drag, okay? So we don't have that feature yet. Believe me, I am dying for it too. I'm so excited. But in the meantime, use the grid to line up your walls and use sketches to line up the walls. Remember, sketches are easy. You just have to use your mouse. You don't need a pen for the sketch, okay? Once the walls have been put up, you also want entry into it. So I've got a Elven City or a gatehouse right here that will lead into this part of the city. And some parts of the city might not have access outside of just a griffin. I didn't put a gatehouse here. So this north side right here is only accessible by griffin. So that makes it more interesting, and it makes it more interesting for your players. They have to find a way to get a mount and get to the other side of the city to explore that part of the city. So making it more of an adventure, making the whole city accessible to your players can make it kind of boring, but creating locked areas that can only be accessed by certain access, whether boat, flying, whatever, makes it more intriguing and more interesting. So now that we've added that, we have to add in access. Okay, so access is roads, and I've painted in the roads, and you know, any texture works for a road, but what I do first is I always use the layout. I'll use a path to lay out my roads, and you only have to do what's called the main arteries. You don't have to make every little tiny little block, every little side road. That doesn't have to be painted in till later. You only need to create the main arteries, and the main arteries are pretty clear here. You've got each one fanning out away from the wall, both on the north and the south side, okay? And then we have another ring and then another ring here. These are the only roads that I need to make, because once I put down the block stamps or houses, then I can paint in the little routes, the little side roads, alleyways. Don't focus on making every single road. Create the main branch structure first. That means the main route, main carriageway, and then the major branching arteries. Again, don't worry about making every single road. So once you've kind of put that down, then you want to paint it in with whatever the road texture you want. There's a lot of different textures you can use for a road. You can use a plain white color at a lower opacity. You could use a color. You could use a texture. Just be sure that whatever scale you're using for stamps, you want the texture to be in the relative same scale. So if you have a scale of 50 for your stamps, or the majority of the stamps, you're going to want the scale of your textures to also be around 50. Otherwise, it's going to look very weird when your road, the stones in your, let's say your cobble road, are bigger than your houses. That won't work. So remember, scale both textures and stamps relatively. It's okay to go above and below. Just be mindful so you don't exaggerate it to the point where it doesn't look very realistic. So now I'm going to, at the end of each one of these routes right here, you see I have these circles right here. I'm going to put landing platforms. So there's a circle here and there's a circle here. I'm going to be putting some landing platforms so that the Griffon Riders can land. And when they land there, they can fan out and get to any part of the wall. So if they come from here and land onto this landing, they can now access by foot or by flying over to any of one of these landings, one of these landing ports right here. So the whole point of my main branch structure is access for protection, military, and the overall aesthetics of having a curved kind of city. And I would kind of want my city to be beautiful. When I think of elves, I think cultured. I think of them as having aesthetically beautiful, things like that. So that's why I've kind of gone with this more circular, rounded approach instead of the more squarish kind of blocks. So let's add those those landings. You'll see I've added the landings here, and I've added a couple along the ridge as well, right here. These landings right here. So there's just some additional landing points for people. They could be like personal landing ports that are, owned by some wealthy family, or it's just additional, or it could be a defensive position with a landing on top of it. So those could be towers, but it's also just there as a defensive positions because it's kind of leading out towards the gorge there. If anyone wants to attack, they'll have those towers there. Okay. Now I'm going to start on, before going on to the blocks and to the major residential areas, when it comes to residential and districts, save that for a little bit later. Focus on your largest section first, which is going to be your centerpiece. So we're going to start with this large island right here. So I'm going to open up my centerpiece, and the first thing we're going to add is a giant tree, right? So we have this giant tree right here. And, it goes perfect in with woodland elves. And the tree is big enough to where I can take a bunch of circular wooden platforms and place them in a sense of organization that we're going to represent like a kind of tree city or a section of a tree city. Okay, so let's open up Griffon Perch, and I'm going to create first the central platform. Okay, this is easy to make. You just use the wooden platforms. They're circular. And then I connected them using the Elven bridges. Okay, so you'll see I got one here, another one right here. So there are 4 bridge pieces that have been rotated carefully to create that circular part. Totally recommend that you make one of those arches first, copy, paste, and then you can attach. So start with the central piece first, create the fanning arch or create the fanning bridge that comes from the central part. Or whichever, it doesn't have to be in this symmetrical formation. You could have it be asymmetrical. You could have one giant platform and then 3 to the left or to the right. The formation is entirely up to you. I'm using just a little bit of symmetry here just to kind of bring in the eye. Just for those of you who are artists or aspiring artists, having both symmetry and asymmetry in your art makes it more appealing, okay? Hey, first time chatter, so glad that you're here, by the way. Okay, so after you've created the arches, then create the last platforms. Create those last platforms right there. And you want to just create the platforms first before you adding on any structures. So you've got the platforms, and then I'm going to put a Griffon's Den in the center. It's actually even called a Griffon's Den, I think. Let me check what stamp this is. It's called the Griffon Riders Den. So it's the perfect thing. And if you ever get confused, by the way, about what kind of things, what kind of access to put in your cities, go through the theme. Like if you're working on an elven city, go through the Elven stamps and look at each stamp and look for ideas for your city by looking at the stamps. I was inspired to make this access through flying and boat by realizing, hey, there's a Griffon Rider Den. That's perfect. Let's use that. So that'll be in the center. That's going to be like a hub where a lot of the Griffon Riders, it could be an academy, whatever you want, right? I'm going to put that in the center. And then I've put 4 great halls. And those could be maybe the 4 houses of the Riders Den, you know, just like Harry Potter. There's different chapters. Within Hogwarts, same thing maybe with this Elven Griffon Rider Den. There are 4 great houses, and each one has prestigious line, and they have a long line of family or Griffon Riders, okay? So not a bad place. Not a bad place to be. And then, of course, once you've kind of created that, you want to do what's called infrastructure, meaning where do people buy the food? Where do people go to get their blacksmith to make the pieces for their horses, bits, where to get their swords, things like that, infrastructure. You're always going to go straight to the pack called specialty buildings. And now I think that's only for human. So in Elven, there should be, let's open them up real quick. When you open up that catalog, you can just go ahead and click elves, and then all the Elven stuff will show up. And then go to the hamburger menu, top right-hand corner, expand all sets, and you can kind of see everything. And I also recommend that you use the, should be one for, let me check, show names. Okay, so just in case you're wondering, well, how do I know what to put down? Look carefully here, because a lot of things look alike, and it's got the name on it. Then you can just scroll through and look at the things that you want to use, okay? So infrastructure stuff is going to be like your training camp, artisans guild, your jeweler, your inn, your herbalist, carpenter, brewery, alchemist. Every city, even a village, is going to need some level of infrastructure to support the citizens of that settlement, okay? It doesn't matter what kind of settlement it is, small, big, doesn't matter, massive. And the bigger your settlement is, the more infrastructure it's going to need, okay? So the way that I've done my infrastructure is, for this centerpiece, is I'll have some branching platforms connected by bridges, just like I made this centerpiece here, and I'll create some infrastructure. And in the infrastructure, I've got blacksmith, brewery, a runesmith, whatever. So whatever you feel you want, the kind of infrastructure you want in that area, put that down, okay? And then last, I'm going to put some dormitories for a group of people to stay. So those 4 houses, and then maybe some additional staff live in a larger dorm. And I don't have to make a lot. Remember, it's a communal. For me, I'm looking at elves from a communal standpoint. So a large domed tower with multiple floors where there's a lot of different housing for those elves to live. So you don't have to put down thousands of houses. You can just put down some larger structures that house all the different people in it. That's a way to kind of avoid having to put more houses down, put a larger structure, and then have most of the elves living in those structures, okay? Now that we've finished that centerpiece, we can kind of go on to, let's continue on with the water section. Those little river islands, we're going to put some perimeter blocks around them, okay? So this might be additional people who live and are associated with that main Griffon Rider Hall. Could be servants, could be additional family members, additional housing, whatever it might be. So if you're not sure with what a perimeter block is a block that rims around to create the block. So let me zoom in real quick and you can kind of take a look, and let me turn off my city layout. Don't really need it right now, but I just want you to take a look at what a perimeter block is. So here's my perimeter block. And all I've done was just ring a bunch of buildings along the edge, creating an opening or a courtyard right here. And in that courtyard is going to be a landing platform, right? Remember, access, right? Since there's no roads or bridges accessing the main island, you could put bridges if you want. You could put a bridge right here if you want. That's up to you, okay? But because I've got my Griffon Rider Den, I'm going to use the landing platforms for Griffon Riders to land, and they can access the different buildings here. And I'm going to put a windmill. I'm going to put windmills on a lot of these islands to process whatever kind of crop that you might be making. And you would expect a lot of strong wind in this gorge. right here because wind is going to blow real strong. So having some windmills down in that gorge makes sense. And you'll notice that every single one of these islands, besides maybe a few, has that perimeter block structure with a courtyard in it and a landing platform, as you would kind of hope, right? All right. So now that we finished that, we can go on to our districts part. Just deal with some of our districts. And the districts are going to be located in the north and south regions. So let's zoom out and take a look. So your basic structure is going to be built around your roads. Okay, so when you're making a block, your major arteries, you're going to fill in the negative space with your block. So let's zoom in real quick and you'll take a look. So this whole section right here, oopsie, let me undo that real quick. There we go. This whole section right here would be considered a large block, which will be broken down into smaller blocks. So just fill in the major sections with structures. And you start with larger blocks first, and then because that will take up more space, so it'll take less time. And then you'll add smaller pieces to fill in, and then you can start painting in making in the smaller blocks that make up that larger super block, okay? So let's start with our districts here. Let's start with our infrastructure, and I'm gonna put some infrastructure, and I'm gonna put the infrastructure right next to the gatehouse of the wall, because when people come to visit the city, the first place they're going to want to go is look for an inn. They're going to want to look for some commerce. Maybe they want to sell goods, a market. So putting in your infrastructure first is a great start. So I'll put in my infrastructure. And here are those infrastructure buildings. Okay. And whenever you put your infrastructure block, put your infrastructure buildings, your carpenters, your whatever, put all that in there first. Then of course, those shops need owners. They need employees to operate those buildings. So put in some housing, okay? And remember, start with the larger blocks first. So you have this larger block right here. Put down some larger blocks, and then you'll notice that I have some smaller blocks in the smaller spaces, gaps, okay? And then if there are any blocks that kind of create a perimeter, this is elves, right? So expect a lot of greenery. You can paint in the courtyard of that block with grass to make it look like there's a green courtyard in the center. That looks nice, and it fits well with the the elven aesthetic of grass, elves, forest, stuff like that, okay? So all my infrastructure is there, and it's on the main route, of course. So that way people who try to patron the city, come visit the city, have direct access to an inn and the necessary infrastructure, okay? Since the main way of flying around getting around is by flying, let's throw in a Griffon Riders Academy, where maybe young upstarts go to train and learn the basic, kind of like a boot camp before they move on to maybe the actual hall where they accept official riders, right? So we'll throw in a Riders Academy, okay? And I've chosen a Fighters Guild to be the academy, and mostly because it has these open spaces right here for training, so this works kind of well. And then of course, I've used it as the centerpiece of the block, and then I've ringed that block with smaller buildings, okay? And of course, I've also made sure to paint in around the blocks or the roads with some green, so that way I have some nice grass, kind of giving it more of that green aesthetic, okay? We're also going to want to put in a Mage Academy. There's a lot of different districts you can have. I've got riders, mages, universities, temple, military, residential, and some parks, but you need to decide for yourself in some pre-planning how many districts and what kind of districts you want, okay? So let's go ahead and start with that next district. Let's go to Mage District, okay? And I've stuck with the same kind of color theme. You've got these blue like roses for the structure, and so I'm sticking with that same color. So making your block or your district share a color theme is helpful to make it distinguished from other blocks. So I've used blue In the other one, I've used red and green. So these blocks are very distinct from each other. I've done something a bit different though. Instead of making it the centerpiece being in the center, I've offsetted the largest piece to the left and then created the block structure for the houses, for maybe the mage elders to live, maybe some student housing for the young mage apprentices and things like that, okay? And of course, I've ringed some of that grass area with bushes, and it kind of gives it a nice aesthetic to it. You don't have to ring every single grass area with bushes, but it does look nice. Or you can make it simple and just put a bush on each corner of the grass area, and it still looks nice. And that way you don't have to put down as many stamps, because so many bushes add up over time. So we have our Mage District. It's at a University District as well. And of course, I would put the University District right next to the Mage District because it's right, you know, the mages are learned individuals. So throwing in a University District, and I'll use the same concept. I'll use a central kind of, or centralized layout with the academy in the center, and then dormitories, staff housing, and other buildings as well, maybe some other classrooms that are outside of the main building as well. And of course, I've put in grass to fill in around the roads, okay? All right, let's go ahead and throw in our temple district as well. We'll put the temple district down here. And you'll see that there's an overarching kind of same theme of, you know, how you want to make your block structures, symmetrical, asymmetrical, whatever you want, okay? So just think about what's really going to decide the block structure is the buildings you're putting in it. If you've got 3 large buildings, then you're not going to have a lot of room for smaller structures. So what's really going to decide that layout or that block structure is just the buildings you're putting inside of it. So for this temple area, I put in 2 temples across from each other, and then I put in a library as well, and which kind of makes sense, right? So maybe you go to temple in the morning, and then you do some reading in the evening with the acolytes or whatever in the library. Or if you just like reading, you just go over to the temple district and pick up a book at the library and do some reading. As always, make sure to throw in smaller structures to kind of show where do the acolyte priests live, where does the head priest live, priestess, where does the priestess live, where does the high priest live, right? So whenever you're making a district, it's the main structures like a temple or a military academy, plus the dormitories, the staff, the people that live there, right? Always do that. Super important. Let's throw in military as well. We want some kind of military. It can be a constabulary, it could be a police block, whatever it is you want, okay? And there is a training camp as the central figure here. Remember, if you just get lost on what to put down, look at the bigger structures first of the catalog. There's this nice kind of training camp right here. This is perfect. We're going to make this the central piece. It's not going to be perfectly centered in the block, but it stands out. So it's that biggest piece. And you have maybe some barracks here with a courtyard for troops to gather, to train, to practice, or just to mobilize and then follow the main route structure to get to any part of the wall or any part of the city. Okay, and then maybe some officers' quarters. That's why I made these a little bit more elaborate. I made them look a little bit nicer. They're not where the regular foot soldiers live. It's where the officer corps might stay. Okay, and I think we have just a couple more blocks. Let's go with our residential. And the residential is going to be the most blocks generally. So there's going to be a lot. And the block structure doesn't have to be any particular way. Let me go and turn on my resident blocks real quick, and we'll break down how I go about doing residence blocks. Just like before, you start with the larger blocks first, like the really large blocks. I'm gonna undo that real quick. You start with the larger pieces first. See this large piece? These are large clusters, and you'll start to piece together kind of a block formation, putting these together. And of course, there's going to be some smaller sections where those big blocks don't fit. So you'll have to go to a medium-sized block to fill in the negative space that remains. You can put individual buildings, or you can put in smaller blocks. It's up to you. Okay, once that's been put together, let's go ahead and show, this is what the main block looks like. Once you've put that main block together, then you can start to take the negative space and start to put in the additional road structure. Okay, you can even put some road here. Maybe you want to put some road in here, okay? You only need to first put in the main branches, and then once you've put the block together with the stamps, then you can start taking a texture or a path, whatever you use for your road, and start going around the buildings. And that's when the alleyways and the small branches kind of come together. So that's how you would put together your roads for your residential. And residential, there's a lot of different, you could always do a perimeter block where it's just all your buildings are on the outside of the perimeter, like this. And then the negative space inside that perimeter would just be grass, a courtyard. It could be a pool. It could be where a bunch of gazebos are. It could be maybe a market, whatever you want. It's called perimeter block, where you just make the frame outside, and then you can put a courtyard in the center. Okay, it's the most common type of block, and they're pretty easy to make. Okay, so putting residential stuff is not as complex as you think. You just need to fill in the main space, and then you would put in the little blocks and then the road branches after that. So it's not too complex to put it together. The last thing that I want to put in is some maybe crops and parks. And remember, it's woodland elves, so, you know, elves like the woods, right? They like nature, they're in tune with it. So I'm going to create a series of parks for these elves to go and walk around that's safe. It's not outside of the wall. You could still travel around outside the wall, travel through the woods, but having some designated park space for the elves to walk around and enjoy nature is very, very nice. So definitely throw in some parks. And we'll be making other elven cities as well. There's moon elves, dark elves, so this is not going to be the only elven city. We'll make a whole bunch, so it'll be kind of fun, right? We'll maybe even do Drow, stuff like that, right? And I'm going to go up here real quick. Notice I also have the park up here. In fact, I would paint in some crops up here so that there are crops within the city to maintain the city so that they have some food, okay? All right. Now, I'm going to throw in some water elements as well. I want to throw in some shipyards that are going to be at the base of the River Island cliff. So we'll throw in some shipyards. Let's go ahead and open those up. Hold on a second here. Oops. Let me turn this on. There we go. There's our shipyards right here. And of course, if you have a shipyard, you're also going to need a ship or some boats. Okay, I'm putting that at the bottom because I also, having two modes. The blend mode is darkened, I believe, for the waterfalls. Having two modes of transportation, actually there's three. The road system, having the Griffon Riders, and then also having boats to get to these parts of the water here. And of course, you're going to want to avoid some of these waterfalls. The boats are going to come in for quite a fun ride. Hey, first time chatter. Glad that you're here, by the way. Awesome. All right. So I've thrown in those water elements. So let's quickly just kind of review the overall process here. Let me go ahead and open up my process thing again. We went ahead and started with our scale. Remember, for every one of those buildings, there's 10 elves inside of them. And remember, when it comes to this scale, it's an overall value. So it's not literally 10 per house, though you could do that if you wanted to. You could have 50 per structure if you wanted to. That's up to you, okay? I recommend that if you're going to have it to where there's 50 per structure, those structures, try to make some larger structures that make sense, because people are going to say, well, how do you have this large population but so little buildings? Just make larger buildings, and that works well for the elves because it's a communal race, or this group of elves are communal, and they're going to be living in large dormitories. You're going to make the layout with the path tool. Remember, I said this before, don't worry about not having a pen or not. It's just a sketch. So when you make the sketch, you're going to end up deleting it anyway. So don't worry about it. Once you've made the layout, both the terrain layout and the city layout, that includes roads, where the walls are and your basic super blocks. Remember, you'll create your smaller blocks later, okay? Once you've done that, you're going to fill in. Remember, your canvas starts with the BG layer. That's the background layer, okay? You're going to paint that whatever texture you want, blue, whatever water you want, and then you'll fill in with the add mode of the mask tool with where the layout, where the land is, and you'll be filling that up. Then you'll be creating your terrain. So I've created those cliffs for every tall section. Each one of these islands has a series of cliffs. After I've made the terrain, I'll want to put up my walls. And it's good to put down walls quickly because it's going to tell you the perimeter, or going to tell you how large your city is. It's your city limits, right? So the walls represent your city limits. So now you kind of contained your workspace where you're working. So that'll be nice. And then you have access, which is going to be roads or canals for boats, whether it's going to be a river, whether it's going to be a platform for your flying griffins, whatever, for your griffins, whatever it might be. A lot of things can qualify for access. Okay. Then you're going to put down your centerpiece, and your centerpiece doesn't have to be dead center of the map, even though it kind of is in this one, sort of, but it can be offset. So you could have this tree moved a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. It doesn't really matter. It's called a centerpiece in a sense that it's the central piece in which you can see. Okay. Then you're going to add in your districts. Totally recommend you start with your infrastructure first, and then start with all your other districts. Don't do residential first. Start with all your other districts: temple, military, university, mage, whatever your districts are. Start with those, and then save your residential for last, because most of your city is going to be residential. It's going to be the largest part. So save that part for last. Okay. After you finish the districts, we'll go ahead and move on to the texturing part. If you're wondering how I decided my texturing, it's not complex. For the city part, I try to use a brown texture to represent dirt first. And I'm going to put that all where my blocks are at. I'm not going to do that where my park is. My parks are going to be green. But wherever there's a city block, I'll make it brown first. That's going to represent dirt. Okay? And then you'll paint in your roads, right? And you can use whatever texture you want. My only recommendation is that if you use a light brown or a light color for your ground texture, whatever your road is, it needs to be in some bit of a contrast. Because the white cobble road is so bright, it's going to work because white and grays are a neutral color. So usually having your roads bring a brighter color will be nice, because it will also cause your stamps to pop out as well. So whenever you're laying down your roads, whatever texture or even path that you use, make sure you use maybe white or gray or a texture that's very bright, because that's going to cause those, see how those roads pop out because of their white against those other colors. So your roads are going to want to be a lighter texture. Okay, just always remember that. And then you're going to be painting in lawns or whatever using the green texture parks. If it's a courtyard with a green courtyard, use that. Okay, so now the last part about texturing is the water bit, and I didn't do a lot of texturing here. All of those white squiggles that you see in the water are actually paths. They're not painted, and I did that on purpose because I can just select the path and move that path anywhere I want. Okay, and then the only other texturing I did was by painting in notice how there's a dark blue and a light blue in the water. Dark blue, the darker your water is, the deeper the water is. The lighter the blue is, the shallower the water is. So if you want to represent depth in your water, darker water, deep, shallow water, lighter. Okay, that's just the trick. All right, it's not complex, it's super easy. Last thing, we're going to add some filters in, okay? Filters are a great thing to add. So let's go ahead and throw in a couple filters. Let's go ahead and turn them off. Now, when you're deciding what kind of filters that you want for your map, you need to think about the theme. This is an elven city, okay? And it's in the forest, okay? And it's next to water. So it kind of makes sense to maybe throw in some fog, So, I mean, this is a silhouette right here, which you could use fog, or you could use a black silhouette. Let's go ahead and switch over to fog, because I think, you know, you're near water, so it kind of makes sense to throw in fog. Lots of moisture, okay, and that moisture is rising up, and there's trees there. So let's show this notion that there's moisture. So put fog around the corners, or you could use the vignette. It's up to you. The vignette will darken out the corners, making the center of the map pop out more. Let's throw down some textures as well. Let's go ahead and turn on this filter here. This is a spotlight. Let me turn it off real quick. The spotlight is just adding a spotlight to the center of the map, causing it to look like the sun is directly overhead, lighting up that island in the center there, okay? And if it's too bright, that's too bright for you, you can always change the opacity a bit, okay? So it's not a bad idea to add in a spotlight filter, especially if there's something central in the center of the map that's important. This has a river island, so the spotlight works well. I'm also going to use the clarity filter, because clarity is going to cause things to be a bit sharper, and you can decide how much clarity you want to use. Maybe you don't want as much clarity, so you can drop it down, or I can boost it up a little bit more, okay? It's going to make the color pop out more. It's going to sharpen things, so it's nice to use. The last one, I'm going to use this bluish or winter filter. And the reason why I'm using it is because I'm next to water and there's some fog out there. So adding in that bluish tint from the winter filter kind of goes well together. And you can use whatever filters that you want. It's up to you. The filters will be decided by the theme, okay? So if you had maybe a fiery dungeon, then you might want to use a red sky or parchment, because it adds a reddish tint or hue to your map, okay? So filters are decided by the theme of the map, okay? All right, well, that is it for the stream. I will be sure to make this map clonable for people to use. If you like this city, you want to use it for yourself or non-commercial purposes, be my guest. I don't mind. It's on my profile. Everything is grouped and labeled, so it's easy to find, easy to edit, easy to deconstruct, reverse engineer, okay? All right, so next week, we're going to be covering how to make roofs, I believe. So I'm going to be showing you, basically what we're going to be doing is taking a bunch of buildings and then roofing them, because it's nice to, if you don't want your players to see the inside of a building when they're outside, having a roof there is extremely helpful, right? So we're going to be covering how to roof your buildings. And there's a lot of complex kind of roofs out there. So we'll go over the types of roofs, how to roof your buildings, and stuff like that. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. I will see you all next week. Please stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you real soon, okay? Auf Wiedersehen, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.